"Get out of here right now before I call security," shouted Margaret Whitfield, manager of the exclusive restaurant Le Chateau, pointing his finger at Diego while dozens of elegant customers watched the scene with morbid curiosity. The 24-year-old, who had worked impeccably for 8 months in that establishment, remained standing in the middle of the main hall with his tray still in his hands. His Colombian accent carried a disconcerting calm when he replied, "Can you explain exactly what my mistake was, Senora Margaret? Don't be disagreed. Mrs. Pemberton informed me that you were rude to her and still had the audacity to question her $2 tip in a $300 account." Margaret crossed his arms, his tone loaded with contempt. "People like you should thank you for any amount you receive." Diego Morales never imagined that his administration formation by the Universidad Nacional de Colombia would be so irrelevant at that time. He had left Bogotá 2 years earlier with the American dream recorded in his chest, but the reality of immigration roles had forced him to accept any available work. Le Chateau was his only source of income to support his sick mother in Colombia, Maria Elena, who needed expensive medicines for heart treatment. "Senora Margaret, at no time was I disrespectful." Diego kept his voice firm, ignoring the prejudiced whispers that echoed at the surrounding tables. "I just asked politely if she had forgotten to include the tip, considering that the service included special wine, personalized entry, and—" "He arrives," Margaret interrupted, her red face of fury. "I don't care about your pathetic excuses. Collect your things and get out, immediately." Mrs. Pemberton, a 60-year-old socialite covered with jewelry that was worth more than Diego's annual salary, watched the scene from his table with a satisfied smile. "Finally, someone puts these people in their place," murmured loudly enough to be heard, pulling out discreet agreements from other customers. "They come here thinking that they deserve the same rights as us." Quick flashback crossed Diego's mind. 3 weeks earlier, he had witnessed Margaret intentionally altering Latin customer accounts, adding extra fees that never appeared to Americans' accounts. He had discreetly photographed some receipts but kept secrecy, needing his job. "Now I realize that I should have acted before." Diego took a deep breath, his eyes traversing faces that had discreetly praised him on previous nights. The Thompson couple who always asked him specifically, the young executive Sarah who had said he was the best waiter of the place. But now everyone stared at him with indifference or even approval for public humiliation. "Margaret, can I ask a question before leaving?" Diego placed the tray carefully on a nearby table. "You really believe that someone who served in this restaurant for 8 months without a single official complaint, who speaks 3 languages and has university education, would be stupid enough to be rude to a client?" Margaret hesitated for a fraction of a second. Something in Diego's tone bothered her deeply. "I understand the situation perfectly," Diego continued, his strangely confident posture for someone being publicly humiliated. "But before leaving, I would like you to know that I keep an impressive photographic memory of faces, conversations, and especially interesting documents." "What does that mean?" Margaret felt a cold in her spine. "It means that some secrets are more valuable than tips, Senora Margaret, and that sometimes injustice has a curious way to turn into someone's greatest opportunity." Diego walked towards the exit with dignity that made several customers look their eyes, embarrassed. No one realized that he discreetly waved to a specific security camera, as if he knew exactly where she was positioned. While everyone watched his departure, no one noticed the graceful man sitting discreetly in the corner of the restaurant, who had witnessed the whole scene with growing interest. His eyes accompanied Diego to the door, and an almost imperceptible smile crossed his face when he took the cell phone and made a quick call. "James, it's me. I found exactly what we were looking for," whispered on the phone without taking my eyes off the door where Diego had left. There, in the face of all the eyes of contempt, Diego had remained firm as one who holds too powerful secret to be revealed before the right time. His last words echoed in the air with a silent promise that would make those people rethink everything they thought know about power, privilege, and consequences. If this story of prejudice and injustice has touched your heart, and forget it to subscribe to the channel, because what happened in the coming days proved that sometimes the universe has very particular ways to balance the balance of justice, and Diego was about to find that not all opportunities are disguised as tragedy. 3 days after the humiliation at Le Chateau, Diego walked the streets of Manhattan carrying curricula that no one wanted to look at. "Sorry, we don't have vacancies for people like you," had been the polite response of 7 restaurants that morning. The other answers were not even that kind. His phone rang. Maria Elena, her mother, calling from Bogotá. "Mijo, managed to send the money from the drugs this month?" The fragile voice crossed the ocean like Diego's chest. He looked at the $15 in his wallet and lied. "Of course, Mama. It's already on the way." Meanwhile, Margaret Whitfield posted photos on Instagram of the special moments on Le Chateau, with hashtags like "Par excellence first" and acquired tradition matters. In the comments, Mrs. Pemberton had written, "Finally a place that keeps your standards. Congratulations on putting that pretentious waiter in his place." The post had over 200 likes. Diego passed the restaurant showcase that night, observing the movement through the glass. Margaret circulated between the tables with her rehearsed smile, ensuring that everything went perfectly. It was as if he had never existed. 8 months of impeccable work erased with a snap of fingers. But something interesting had happened 2 days earlier. Diego had received an unexpected connection from a man who identified himself only as James, a lawyer who specializes in labor rights. The voice was polite, almost kind. "I heard about the incident at Le Chateau. I would like to talk to you about some irregularities we observed in the establishment." "I have no money for lawyer," Diego had answered, suspicious. "Who spoke of money? Some injustices are so clear that they become a matter of principles, not fees." The meeting was scheduled for the next day in an elegant office in downtown Manhattan. Diego had researched about such James Morrison on the internet, renowned lawyer, specializing in discrimination cases, with an impressive victory rate against large corporations. While waiting in the office reception room, Diego rethought the last months at Le Chateau. The small coincidences began to make sense. The altered accounts he had photographed, the prejudiced comments Margaret made when he thought no one was listening to, the difference in treatment between Latin and American employees. James Morrison appeared, a 50-year-old man, gray hair, impeccable suit, and a smile that inspired immediate confidence. "Diego, nice to get pleased. Before we start, I need to tell you something interesting." He opened a thick paste on the table. "Le Chateau has been being investigated for 3 months for tax evasion and discriminatory practices. What happened to you was just the water drop we needed." Diego frowned. "Like this? We have 5 Latin employees who have been fired in the same circumstances as you in the last 2 years, all for inappropriate behaviors that were curiously never officially documented, all replaced by white employees with smaller salaries." The puzzle pieces began to fit Diego's mind. "The photos I took from the altered accounts, they will be extremely useful. But Diego, I need to understand one thing." James leaned forward, the serious look. "Margaret Whitfield and Mrs. Pemberton have no idea what is about to happen. They believe you have disappeared, defeated, and humiliated. And isn't that what happened?" James smiled, almost predatory. "Far from it. In fact, they have just made the biggest mistake of their lives. And best of all, we will use their own arrogance against themselves." Diego felt something awaken inside his chest. It was not angry, but a strange feeling of controlled power. "What do you have in mind?" "Patience. First, we need to gather more evidence. And you, my friend, will be ours in the sleeve." James slid a card around the table. "You have a choice. Continue looking for waiter while Margaret and Mrs. Pemberton laugh at your defeat, or join me to show them the true meaning of the word consequences." That night, Diego walked the streets of Manhattan with a completely different feeling. It was no longer the desperate victim 3 days ago. Something fundamental had changed inside, a silent understanding that sometimes justice needs to be built with its own hands. Across the city, Margaret posted another photo on Instagram. "Another perfect night at Le Chateau. Our clientele demanding deserves only the best." She did not imagine that each post, every arrogant comment, every public demonstration of superiority was being carefully documented and filed. What those privileged people did not know was that every act of contempt was writing their own sentence of defeat. And Diego, the simple immigrant waiter they had underestimated, was about to prove that true intelligence has no accent, has no skin color, and definitely does not forgive those who confuse dignity with weakness. A week after the meeting with James Morrison, Diego received a proposal that completely changed the course of events. "I need you to go back to Le Chateau," said James over the phone, his voice loaded with almost scary confidence. "But this time, not as an employee." "Like this?" Diego frowned, walking through the small apartment he shared with 2 other immigrants. "As a customer. We have a reservation on your name for tonight, table for 4 people, privileged view for the whole operation." The irony was delicious. Diego would return to the place of his humiliation wearing a borrowed suit, accompanied by people that Margaret never imagined that he could know. James had organized everything. 2 international investors, allegedly interested in opportunities in the American gastronomic sector. When Diego crossed the door of Le Chateau that night, the transformation was impressive. The humiliated waiter had disappeared, replaced by a confident young executive speaking fluently in English, Spanish, and French with his commercial partners. Margaret almost choked on the wine when he saw him. Her eyes widened with pure panic. The former employee she had publicly destroyed was sitting on the restaurant's most expensive table, clearly in power position. "Diego?" She approached hesitantly, the forced smile shaking on her lips. "What a surprise to see you here, Senora Margaret." Diego smiled with a cold courtesy. I hope there is no problem with our reserve. My investors came especially to know Le Chateau's excellence. One of the investors, well, no, in fact another James lawyer, commented loud enough to hear, interesting establishment. We hear some rumors about administrative practices. Nothing confirmed, of course. Margaret paled visibly. In recent days, I had received 3 customer calls asking irregularities in the accounts, and an unexpected visit by a tax inspector that she managed to dispense with only total transparency in the documentation. Mrs. Pemberton, sitting at his usual table, watched the scene with growing discomfort. The insolent waiter she had helped humiliate now commanded the full restaurant's attention, discussing multiple languages as if she owned the place. Maybe we should ask for the bill, whispered to her husband, but it was too late. Diego had already noticed his presence. Mrs. Pemberton, he waved cordially. What a wonderful coincidence. I hope you are enjoying the experience here. As I remember, you have very specific opinions about the level of service. The seemingly innocent comment carried a subtle threat that made Mrs. Pemberton look away quickly. During dinner, Diego paid meticulous attention to every detail. As Margaret discreetly altered the specific table accounts, the difference in treatment between American and Latin customers, the biased comments whispered among employees. But the real blow came when James appeared casually in the restaurant, presenting himself as a legal advisor specializing in compliance for high gastronomy establishments. Interesting operation you have here, commented James, analyzing the environment with professional look. I imagine that all procedures are properly documented and audited. Margaret felt her legs weakened. Of course, we always follow all regulations. Perfect. Because my clients here, James managed to Diego and the investors, are considering a significant acquisition in the sector. Of course, we would need a complete audit before any investment. The word audit echoed by Margaret's mind as a death sentence. She knew exactly how many irregularities would be discovered in a serious investigation. That night, while nervously cleansed his office, Margaret found an old photo of the team, Diego smiling in the center, surrounded by colleagues who clearly respected him. How had that boy underestimated so much? Diego, in turn, left the restaurant with a sensation of power controlled by the veins. It was not a revenge. It was justice being built brick by brick, using the very tools of the system that had tried to destroy. I did it. First stage completed, said James when they met outside. Margaret is terrified, Mrs. Pemberton is suspicious, and they still have no idea what is really happening. Diego looked back, watching Le Chateau's gold lights. And now? James smiled almost predatory. Now let's show them that underestimating someone based on prejudice is not just morally wrong. It's the stupid decision you can make in the business world. What Margaret and Mrs. Pemberton didn't know was that that night at the restaurant was just the first movement of a much more complex chess match. And Diego, the simple immigrant waiter they had despised, was about to prove that true intelligence does not need pedigree. It only needs opportunity and determination to completely rewrite the rules of the game. The real bomb exploded on Thursday at 2:30 p.m. when Margaret received her weekly manicure at the most chic hall in Manhattan. Your phone rang. It was Mrs. Pemberton, hysterical. Margaret, did you see the news? That waiter? He was not who we thought it was. Margaret almost knocked his cell phone when he opened the link that Mrs. Pemberton had sent. On the first page of the New York Business Journal, a devastating headline. Serval of Colombian Empire infiltrated as waiter exposes a network of discrimination in elite restaurants. The photo showed Diego in an impeccable suit alongside James Morrison, but now identified as Diego Morales Vasquez, the only son of Maria Elena Vasquez, the Colombian coffee industry, and one of the richest women in Latin America. No, this cannot be real, Margaret whispered, reading the matter with increasing horror. The 6-month journalistic research had systematically documented discriminatory practices in 15 luxury restaurants with Le Chateau as exemplary case of institutionalized prejudice. The evidence was overwhelming. Audio recordings obtained through a device that Diego had used discreetly throughout those months, altered account photographs he had meticulously documented, and testimonies from other Latin employees who had been fired under similar circumstances. But the final blow was in the last paragraph. Morales Vasquez revealed that his mother, supposedly sick in Bogotá, is actually Maria Elena Vasquez, whose coffee empire employs more than 50,000 people and has significant appearances in several American restaurants. Investigation was part of a Vasquez Foundation's social responsibility project. Margaret's phone exploded with calls. First was the owner of Le Chateau, furiously. Margaret, you have 5 minutes to explain to me how the hell we left a billionaire's son to work as a waiter for 8 months unknowingly. Then came the lawyers, the journalists, the routine health inspectors who appeared simultaneously. In a matter of hours, Le Chateau was being audited by 3 different organs. Mrs. Pemberton called again, this time crying. My husband said that if it stains our reputation in society, he will blame me forever. How could we be so stupid? But the real humiliation came when Diego appeared in person at the restaurant that same afternoon. No more the humiliated waiter, but Diego Morales Vasquez, accompanied by a team of lawyers and journalists. Margaret tried to hide in the office, but it was too late. Diego walked straight to her, her posture radiating an authority she had never shown as an employee. Senora Margaret, he said, his calm voice carrying a power that made her back off instinctively. I imagine you have seen the news? Diego, I didn't know, Margaret stuttered, his hands shaking visibly. Of course I didn't know. Just as I didn't know I was changing accounts of Latin customers 2 years ago. Just as I didn't know I was violating at least 15 federal labor laws. Diego put a thick paste on the table. But I knew everything. James Morrison appeared next to him. Margaret, I would like to formally present my client. No Diego, the waiter you humiliate, but Diego Morales Vasquez, legal representative of the Vasquez Foundation, who now has a majority interest in this restaurant. The floor seemed to collapse under Margaret's feet. What do you mean, majority interest? Its owner sold 51% of the shares 2 hours ago, when he realized that facing a discrimination process would cost more than the total value of the establishment, James explained with a cold smile. Diego is technically your new boss. Mrs. Pemberton chose exactly that moment to enter the restaurant, probably to clarify misunderstandings. When he saw Diego surrounded by cameras and lawyers, his legs gave in and he left herself leaning on a table. Mrs. Pemberton, Diego turned to her with a devastating courtesy. Good to see her again. I imagine you remember your comments about people like me. Would you like to comment publicly about your opinions about immigrants and Latin workers? The socialite tried to escape, but the journalists had already surrounded both. The questions rained relentless. Is it true that they altered customer-based accounts? How do they feel being exposed by someone who considered inferior? Do you want to apologize publicly? Diego watched the chaos for a moment, then raised his hand, asking for silence. I want to make something very clear. His voice echoed through the crowded restaurant. I didn't do it for personal revenge. I did it for my mother, who taught me that purposeless privilege is just waste. I did for the other staff who were humiliated before me. And I did to prove that underestimating someone based on prejudice is not only morally wrong, it's the stupid decision you can take. Margaret collapsed in a chair, realizing that he had not only lost his job, but his reputation was destroyed forever. Mrs. Pemberton had ran out, abandoning his bag on the table. Inside her, his phone touched incessantly with friends' calls wanting to know if it was true. While the cameras captured every moment of the fall of those 2 women, Diego remained serene. He had turned 8 months of silent humiliation into the most eloquent lesson about consequences that this place had already witnessed. But there was still a question in the air that would make all the difference to the future. Would the complete destruction of arrogance and prejudice be sufficient to build something truly new? Or Diego had even greater plans for that place that had underestimated both his dignity and his intelligence? 6 months after the Le Chateau exhibition, Diego Morales Vasquez sat on the main table of Café Esperanza, the restaurant born from the ashes of the former Le Chateau. The place now breathed a completely different energy. Employees of all nationalities worked side by side, customers of all social classes divided the same space, and the kitchen served a unique fusion between haute cuisine and Latin flavors. Senor Diego, smiled Carmen, the new manager, a Salvadoran woman who had been fired from Le Chateau 2 years earlier by cultural inadequacy. The 19-hour reserve is confirmed. Is the interview for the Netflix documentary? Diego nodded, watching the line that was forming outside the window. Coffee Esperanza had become not only a gastronomic success, but a symbol of social transformation that attracted people from all over the world. The cell phone rang. It was Maria Elena, her mother, calling from Bogota. Piss, I just saw the story at CNN about the restaurant. His father would be so proud. His voice carried the emotion of a mother who had pretended to be sick for months to support her son's social investigation. Mama, you were the best actress in the family, Diego laughed, remembering the tied calls on expensive medicines that had given authenticity to their desperate waiter performance. At the corner table, ironically where Mrs. Pemberton used to sit, a group of young immigrants celebrated. They were the 5 beneficiaries of the new scholarship Dignity program, created with the funds obtained in the court agreement that had completely bankrupted the old Le Chateau. Margaret Whitfield had disappeared from the New York gastronomic scene after losing not just his job but facing criminal proceedings for evasion. Her former elite friends avoided her as a plague, and she now worked as a receptionist in a third-class hotel in Queens. Irony of fate that put her again serving people who previously despised. Mrs. Pemberton had an even more dramatic destination. Her husband had asked for divorce after the scandal completely destroyed her reputation in social circles. She lost not only the status, but half of the fortune in the process. The same friends who previously agreed with their prejudiced comments now pretended not to know her at the social events I could still attend. The real irony, commented James Morrison, who had become not only a lawyer, but a coffee shop for Coffee Esperanza, is that they still didn't understand the lesson. Margaret blames you for the mistake. Mrs. Pemberton blames the circumstances. Neither admitted that the problem was in their own prejudices. Diego watched a Mexican family being affectionately attended by an American waiter, an unthinkable scene in the age of the old Le Chateau. Maybe it's better that way. Some people need to lose everything to start questioning their choices. The bell rang and entered the Netflix reporter, accompanied by a filming team. Mr. Morales Vasquez, we are ready for the interview on how to turn injustice into a social revolution. During the recording, Diego reflected on the final question. Which advice would you give to people who face discrimination? Never underestimate the power of strategic patience, he replied, his eyes shining with the wisdom of those who had turned humiliation into victory. Margaret and Mrs. Pemberton believed I was just another vulnerable immigrant because that's what they wanted to see. They confused silent dignity with weakness, accent with ignorance, and humility with inferiority. He paused, looking straight at the camera. The best revenge is not to destroy who hurt you. It is to build something so great that they realize how much they were wasting to underestimate you. Every insult I received has become fuel. Every moment of contempt became motivation. Coffee Esperanza now employed 47 people, 80% of them Latin immigrants who had faced discrimination in other establishments. The restaurant not only prospered financially, but had become a social laboratory that proved daily that diversity is not charity, it is business intelligence. In the main wall, a phrase in Portuguese, Spanish, and English summarized everything. Dignity has no accent, competence has no color, and justice has no nationality. 6 months earlier, Diego was a public waiter publicly. Today, he was a social entrepreneur, recognized activist, and living proof that underestimating someone based on prejudice is not only morally wrong, it is the most expensive mistake you can make. Margaret tried to destroy Diego, but eventually destroyed herself. Mrs. Pemberton wanted to humiliate a simple immigrant, but found that he had moved with someone whose power was far beyond his limited understanding. Diego's story has proved that sometimes injustice is just the universe preparing the stage for an unforgettable lesson on respect, dignity, and the deadly danger of confusing privilege with superiority. And you? Have you already underestimated someone based on appearances or prejudice? Leave in the comments your reflection on how small acts of contempt can become the greatest lessons of our lives. If this story of transformation and justice has touched your heart, subscribe to the channel to discover more stories that prove that true strength is who you least expect.